Hey everyone, Cody Hayes here, and I'd like to welcome you to part 4 as we look at the book of Acts. And we left off with what's known as Luke's Paul versus Paul's Paul, where essentially Luke presents Paul in a very different manner than Paul presents himself in his own letters. Well, are there any ways to reconcile the differences? Well, here are some attempts at doing so. One is that while Paul had a disciple named Luke, the Luke who is the author of Luke Acts, the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts, is not that disciple. At the end of the letter to the Philippians, Paul does mention a Luke among his companions. Um, in the letter to the Colossians, which is a disputed letter of Paul's, but Paul also mentions a Luke there. So Paul had a disciple for certain named Luke, but the author of the Gospel of Luke and the book of Acts was not that individual, but somebody else. However, somebody copying the Gospel of Luke, and specifically here the book of Acts, thought that this author was that disciple. And to emphasize that point, that's where the we passages get inserted. Another attempt is that Paul just changed his mind regarding the Torah and the Gentiles. Again, the main theology overall of Paul is that the death of Christ does away with the Torah slash law. Well, maybe at some point Paul just changed his mind on that issue. People change their minds all the time. And in the case with the Gentiles, same thing, that at one time, he may have thought that the Gentiles were ignorant regarding the God of Abraham. And then later, he felt that they knew full well that the God of Abraham is the one true God, that Paul just changed his mind. I think that with the Gentiles, you can build a much stronger case of Paul changing his mind than you can with the Torah, because his attitude towards the Torah is pretty much the same in the majority of his letters when he discusses the Torah. Another is that at certain points writing about Paul, Luke or somebody who copied him just made a mistake. It's very similar to the situation with the census involving Quirinius in the Gospel of Luke, that somebody made a mistake, whether that was Luke or someone else. In the case with Paul, when Paul in Galatians discusses what happened to him, following his conversion, he makes the statement about how he does not lie. Now, there are a couple ways of looking at that statement. One is that there was an account being circulated in early Christian circles regarding what happened to Paul after his experience, and Paul is trying to answer that what people are saying is just not true. The other possibility is that what people are saying is the truth, but that's not what Paul wanted them to think. So when he makes the statement, I do not lie, he's trying to get people to believe him. I would say, though, that considering, what would be gained by Paul wanting to change the story, because there really wouldn't be much to gain either way. So I would say, if anything, Paul is trying to correct things that were said about him. But when Luke is putting this information down into paper, he gets the oral account, which has a different take of what happened after Paul's conversion, and that's what he writes. Or he got the correct information, but somebody who was copying him got the incorrect information and changed it. But simply put, regarding Paul, somebody made a mistake, whether it was Luke or someone else. Another possibility here is that Luke disagreed with Paul on issues relating to the Torah and the Gentiles, and he described Paul in a manner which fit his point of view. That's another possibility, that Luke thought that Paul was too harsh on the commandments, the laws of the Torah, and also his attitude towards the Gentiles. And he wanted to change that. That's again another possibility. But, on closing this subject, I think of something that a colleague of mine told me once. My particular colleague did his undergraduate work at SBU in Bolivar, Southwest Baptist University. And he mentioned that the professor that he had on the issue of Luke's Paul versus Paul's Paul, the professor at some point told the class, "Look, guys, I don't have any great answers at reconciling these differences. I'm going to leave that up to you to try to figure out on your own." Well, in any case, that's all that we have regarding the book of Acts. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to send me an email. Until then, take care.